Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Digging into Ceramics. I open simply with the question, do you believe in magic? So today, I will be asking you to consider the deeper meanings of everyday things and to recognize the psychological and social power of belief. When Peter Pan opened in London in 1904, the audience was called upon to save a dying fairy by clapping their hands to show that they believed in the supernatural. In that moment, the theater became a ritual space. I remember that same moment during the 1963 live television broadcast. Sitting before the black and white glow of the screen, I clapped with all of my heart. Belief itself had become power. And so I ask, what if a 19th century American stoneware ring bottle was more than a simple ceramic object? What if, in the hands of a practicing 19th century hoodoo doctor, as seen in this rare period image, carried meanings that move beyond utility and into the realm of protection, healing, and spiritual force? Perhaps the real issue is not whether magic was real, but whether people believed in it. And history has shown that belief itself can change the world. My story begins in October of 2017, when this 19th century American ring bottle came up for auction in Columbia, South Carolina. A ring bottle, sometimes called a jug or a flask, is a somewhat common southern vessel form, made in a number of regional potteries. The ring bottle is an ancient form. It originates in classical antiquity, with examples made in the Mediterranean region and later in medieval Europe. The ring bottle comes to America and was made in 19th century earthenware and stoneware potteries from New England to Texas. Ultimately, they become an iconic Southern object. The auction example was distinguished by a graceful handle, a rectangular base that allowed it to stand upright, and a streaky, iron-rich slipped glaze characteristic of the Columbia area potteries. Its glazed bottom was inscribed, Dr. Peter Davis, and dated 1888, elevating an otherwise somewhat common vessel into an object of exceptional rarity, as such inscriptions are virtually unknown in surviving examples. No additional historical information came with the sale. Similar ring bottles are attributed to the Landrum pottery in Columbia. The pottery was established by Abner Landrum in 1832 and subsequently owned by his son Linnaeus in 1859. The pottery was later operated by John J. Stork, who was the son-in-law of Abner Landrum. Archaeological fragments of ring bottles inscribed with Stork's name have been recovered from the site. The 1888 date corresponds with John Stork's sons, Edward and Robert's tenure at the pottery. Edward left Columbia in the early 20th century, and by 1909 he was still making the same ring bottle form in Orange, Georgia. At the time of the bottle's discovery, I had no idea who Dr. Peter Davis was, until researcher Corbett Toussaint posted on her social media that she had found a Dr. Davis described as the famous Black Hoodoo doctor of Columbia, South Carolina. Further research soon began to turn up other accounts published in national newspapers throughout the country. One article compared Dr. Davis to a lineal descendant of one of the witches of Macbeth, revealing how contemporaries understood his conjuring within a much older history of magic and witchcraft. When the William Shakespeare audience first heard double, double, toil and trouble, the inner workings of sorcery were already well embedded in the early 17th century Jacobean zeitgeist. In fact, by 1603, King James I had published a book on black magic. His English subjects knew him as a staunch opponent of the practice. 400 years later, American blues musicians became the troubadours of magical practices. When Bessie Brown sang Hoodoo blues, her incantations were yet another chapter in the tradition. Through songs like Ma Rainey's Black Cat Hoot Owl Blues, listeners encountered a world in which supernatural forces were woven into everyday African American life and popular culture. In 1925, Sarah Martin's Hoodoo Blues preserved an actual hoodoo spell, calling upon toenail clippings, hair, and other personal objects believed to carry an individual's spiritual essence. The success of what I have to say today will depend upon your own belief in the supernatural. So I have developed several questions to help evaluate your predisposition to the subject. For example, have you ever buried the bone of a black cat beneath a window to cast a spell? Perhaps you have sprinkled graveyard dirt or brick dust around your door for protection? Certainly, many of us have grown up snapping a turkey breastbone in half, the so-called wishbone. And finally, who hasn't made a wish and blown out a candle? Some would say the most basic expression of a hoodoo practice. For me, the most immediate way of understanding what hoodoo is by substituting the words wishful thinking. Like Dorothy's ruby slippers in The Wizard of Oz, ordinary objects become extraordinary through belief. These slippers were more than shoes. They were magical instruments believed to possess the power to carry Dorothy home. So hoodoo is the deliberate act of combining conscious intention with material rituals to bring about love, health, protection, and prosperity, or at times revenge, curses, and other harmful ends. The materials of hoodoo range from a simple lucky penny or a rabbit's foot to elaborate combinations of roots, herbs, minerals, animal parts, and other objects with metaphysical associations. Hoodoo, in its many forms, have often been sensationalized and the subject of Hollywood blockbuster movies. It is often mocked in popular culture, subject to great derision. And more often than not, these magical arts are considered the purview of hucksters, fraudsters, and scam artists. The legal record is filled with stories of arrests and prosecutions. To summarize, hoodoo is not a religion, but it is informed by underlying African, Christian, and Native American religious beliefs. The practice was an integral part of the African American fabric. The term conjure is often used interchangeably, particularly before emancipation. Likewise, the term root work is commonly used. 19th-century texts, often known as slave narratives, tell us about the role of the conjurer within enslaved communities. William Wells Brown wrote, "Nearly every large plantation had at least one conjurer," and Henry Walton Bibb wrote that conjuration, tricking, and witchcraft are an integral part of the slave populations on plantations. Famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass wrote about receiving special roots from the plantation conjurer for protection against harsh beatings. With the advent of emancipation, hoodoo was transformed, nationalized, and homogenized as recently freed African Americans moved to southern urban areas and to the industrial North. It is in post-emancipation that the earliest use of the word hoodoo appears in the Memphis Daily Appeal. The article captures the most important elements of Southern hoodoo. and attempts to distinguish between hoodoo, the practice of voodoo, and the practice of obey. Obey is the Caribbean tradition of spiritual practice and folk magic rooted in African beliefs and shaped by Christian, Indigenous American, and European influences. Voodoo is considered a religion that combines elements of African ancestor worship with aspects of Catholicism, where practitioners interact with spirits through rituals, dance, and trance states. Here is one such dance recorded in New Orleans in the 1880s. Many of you may be familiar with the life and legend of New Orleans voodoo queen Marie Laveau, the most famous practitioner in all of America. It is worth noting not a single physical artifact of her life or practice is known to survive. Documentation for the practice of hoodoo explodes in the late 19th century. The Southern Workman, a journal distributed by the Hampton Institute in Virginia, publishes African American and Native American folklore beginning in 1872. In fact, one of the earliest published spells appears in the Southern Workman, describing how to assemble a bottle charm using nails, straight pins, red flannel, and whiskey. Virtually all cultural groups practice some form of folk magic. The practice of powwow by the Pennsylvania Germans is reflected in the symbolism of fracture and hex signs. The Germanic immigrants of the Western Carolinas were predisposed to the services of African American hoodoo doctors. By the early 20th century, the telling of fortunes was an important part of conjuring, which included white professional fortune tellers catering to privileged clientele throughout America. Important books begin to appear, such as Old Rabbit, the Voodoo, by Mary Alicia Owen, writing about Native American and African American conjurers in her hometown of St. Joseph's, Missouri. In Mississippi, Newell Niles Puckett recorded graveyard decorations, conjuring spells, folk medicine recipes, and created a remarkable photographic archive of root doctors. Another influential and prolific writer was Zora Neale Hurston. Trained in anthropology, Hurston is regarded as the most important Black writer to collect first-hand accounts of conjure and root work. Between 1936 and 1940, a massive archive of hoodoo and conjure spells was recorded by Harry Middleton Hyatt, relying upon African American informants, which resulted in a 5,000-page, 5-volume publication. Over 13,000 separate magic spells and folktales come directly from practitioners in 12 different states. Of these states, South Carolina was considered a hotbed of 19th century hoodoo and the home of Dr. Peter Davis. We know little about Dr. Davis's life. The 1880 census reveals that Peter Davis was born into slavery around 1812. His occupation is listed as farmer. His wife Jane is age 59 and listed as keeping home. No children are indicated. We don't have a visual record of Dr. Davis. However, historical accounts often remark on the highly distinctive physical characteristics of hoodoo doctors, suggesting a special relationship with the spirit world. One hoodoo doctor was described as tall and gaunt, with a wealth of long wavy hair, with one brown and one blue eye. I invited New Orleans artist Andrew Hopkins to create an imagined portrait of Dr. Davis, incorporating the ring bottle. Andrew is well known for his interest in the material culture and history of southern Louisiana. Dr. Davis practiced in Columbia, South Carolina, which had been established in 1786 as the new state capital and laid out on the fall line of the Congaree River. By the late 19th century, Columbia was a thriving commercial city with a large African American population and a vibrant tradition of hoodoo practice. In 1882, Dr. Davis signs the Columbia voter roll with his X mark, suggesting that he may have been illiterate. From this document, we also learn that he was a resident of Ward 3, a highly urbanized section of Columbia. In 1884, a New York Times article reports that a Dr. Peter Davis was practicing medicine despite having no formal medical degree. A provision in South Carolina's law allowed individuals who had practiced medicine for at least 7 years without a diploma to continue doing so if their experience could be certified by 3 reputable citizens. Davis successfully met this requirement and was thus legally recognized as Dr. Davis. His name was subsequently included in the 1884 list of licensed physicians in Columbia surrounding Richland County. The listing credits him as having a diploma, but leaves blank the columns for date issued and by whom granted. We know that in 1888, a stoneware ring bottle is made at Dr. Davis's request, or perhaps presented to him either as a gift or as a form of payment for his services. No connection between the Stork family of potters and Dr. Davis has been found. Between 1893 and 1894, the legal entanglements of Dr. Davis become national news. Arrested on several occasions, and based on the sheer volume of articles that appear, Dr. Davis ranks among the most publicized of all American hoodoo doctors. The newspaper stories describe traditional hoodoo substances, such as hoodoo water, graveyard dirt, dead men's powder, lodestones, whiskey, gourds, and roots. I wanted to recreate Dr. Davis's medical bag of tricks for this presentation, so I turned to my internet options. Within a half hour of electronic browsing, eBay, Etsy, and Amazon, and through the modern magic of free second-day shipping, I had physically replicated the major workings of Dr. Davis's medical cabinet. The newspaper accounts tracked the legal charges brought against Dr. Davis by Adolphus Hollub for receiving money on false pretenses. Hollub is described as a German or Dutchman farmer from nearby Orangeburg, South Carolina. The accounts tell us that Hollub engaged Dr. Davis to protect him and his family, his cattle, his crops from sickness, drought, storms, and pestilence. Unfortunately, it becomes clear that Dr. Davis's prescriptions ultimately did not work. Hollub complains that after Dr. Davis's treatment, that 27 of his hogs die. That his cow, which had a fine udder and looked like she would give 5 gallons, would only give about a quart. His sister-in-law remained lying critically ill in bed. Adolphus also testified that after giving his mule the prescribed medicine from Dr. Davis, the animal simply lay down on the way home and wouldn't get up. And this is my favorite. Hollub testifies to the judge, "Your Honor, I plant 13 acres and make only 1 bale of cotton." Despite the numerous hearings, the Orangeburg court dismisses the charges on January 8, 1894. The lack of a conviction may seem surprising, but I think that Dr. Davis was a favorite son of the South Carolina legal system. We know that he had interacted with the courts on several occasions, both as a plaintiff and as a defendant. I say this because hoodoo doctors were considered the poor man's lawyers in the black communities that were denied legal services. They provided clients with intercessions for successful outcomes in court cases. Such spells are still sold today for those seeking favorable verdicts. Many questions remain, but perhaps the most basic is, how did the ring bottle actually function in Dr. Davis's practice? Ceramic vessels have always had supernatural associations throughout history, serving as containers for genies and magical potions. Skeptics of the ring bottle's association with hoodoo have dismissed it as nothing more than a whiskey flask. Yet, this argument actually makes the case for a conjure connection. Whiskey was the most common ritual ingredient in hoodoo. In Dr. Peter Davis's own practice, he used drops of whiskey to activate lodestones provided to his clients. The use of whiskey does not undermine a hoodoo interpretation. It is precisely what we might expect to find associated with a working conjure vessel. The imposing ring bottle was more than a container. In the hands of Dr. Davis, it may have functioned as a power object, a material focus for supernatural forces, much like a shaman's staff or a fortune teller's crystal ball. After the dismissal of his case, presumably Dr. Davis continued to practice his profession. Dr. Davis dies from senile exhaustion on December 21st, 1911, at the age of 99. He was buried in an unmarked plot at the South Carolina State Hospital Cemetery. In hoodoo, the grave was not the end, as graveyard dirt was believed to carry that person's spiritual essence, and could be used for a variety of magical purposes, as well as communications with the spiritual world. Hoodoo never disappeared after its 19th century and early 20th century heyday, and it remains vibrant today. Modern hoodoo practitioners connect with clients through Instagram, Facebook, and other online platforms, while collecting fees through PayPal. The tools have changed, but the traditions and the belief in their power endure. The Peter Davis ring bottle represents both a physical and metaphysical gateway to the widespread practice of African American folk magic, which was part of Southern culture from the early days of colonization and slavery until the present. It is one of the most important American ceramic discoveries in recent decades, as it preserves the material, spiritual, and cultural legacy of 19th century African American hoodoo. With a little imagination, it can transport you into a realm of mystery and intrigue. Dr. Davis's ring bottle remains undisturbed, sealed with a cork. We have considered residue analysis, but I have been advised by more than one person of the potential adverse reaction if the bottle is ever opened. Thank you for your attention today, and I owe thanks to many who have helped me along the way. If you would like to learn more about Dr. Davis, please see my article in the 2023 volume of Ceramics in America. It has been an exciting journey into this discovery, and I will be back soon with more exciting ceramic stories. And I'm gonna get your toenail clipping, make a red pepper stew. But all I'm going to do is going to be too hot for you. Gonna have lips and snakes crawling out of your mouth. Now, tell you ought to stop that, honey. You can't do that.